Hey everyone. So today we have a very special guest, my good friend Piyush. Now, Piyush is a very, very humble man. It took him a while to get on the show um, because that's how humble he is. And I am very excited to present to you Piyush, who's going to share with us his story um, that he has. Now, Piyush had the opportunity to work at some of the biggest startups in India. And today he is a venture capitalist at Tomorrow Capital, and he's going to share with us his journey of how he got to where he is today. So Piyush, thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to have you today on the show.
Thanks a lot, Ephraim. I think, like yourself mentioned, I wasn't very sure that I add a lot of value. I'm not as experienced or as much of a star as a lot of other people who have been on your show, but I hope I can share a few things about me that will help or sort of enlighten people a little bit. So,
Sure.
Over to you.
Sure, of course. Listen, I always say, there always is something you could learn from someone else. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a journey. You know, people, you have something that I don't have, I have something you don't have, and the way we combine that together, that's how we become so much more powerful. You know, and the purpose of two people meeting is always to benefit a third person, and so that's the power in this.
Of course. And apart from that, it's like you're really so enthusiastic and persuasive. It's very hard to say no beyond the point. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. So let's start all the way from the beginning. You know, so all the way from your little infant, where are you from, and what was your upbringing like?
Sure. So I think I was born and brought up in Calcutta, and I think very different from a lot of sort of people from my peer group or people I work with, because I come from a business family. I'm sort of the black sheep of the family because I'm the only one in the entire extended family of say 40 people who's not in the family business. So I've always been the only one who, even my younger brother who passed out of IIM Kozhikode is back in the family business. So it's really sort of a lot. It's really very different from what I've sort of grown up with, because I've always grown up with people running their own businesses and creating their own businesses. So in that sense, venture capital is not so different for me. Very honestly, throughout my schooling life, actually, I always wanted to be a sportsman. So right up to college, when I used to play state level basketball, and I know basketball is not as good.
Basketball?
Yeah, I know the standard is not as good as it would be in the States, but I was really, really into it. But then once in college, I decided I had to take a call between what I wanted to do, and then it just seemed like getting into an MBA in a good college would sort of prop me up and sort of help me decide, actually not really make a call, but help me decide what I wanted to do next, because and I think it was the right decision to take, because that's the first time I went out of home, and I think the learning in a B school or a good B school is much more outside the classroom than inside the classroom, because you meet with some of the sharpest minds in the country. And so I went to IIM Ahmedabad, did my MBA, and then and then I've had like almost 10 years of experience since then.
Wow. So 1 second. Usually in India, you hear about, kids want to play cricket, want to become a cricket player, they want to become, a soccer player. They have basketball courts in India?
They absolutely have basketball courts in India. And I think even back then, I always had a contrarian streak in me. Yeah. And I think in life and in financial markets and in venture capital, you sort of, the guys who make money are the ones who are contrarian, right? So.
Wow, it's phenomenal. The first person I know that plays basketball. That's incredible. So when I come, we definitely have to have a game. We're going to have to play some games.
Absolutely.
So that's incredible. So you have entrepreneurship in your DNA, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, and we come from a community of Marwadis, and they're famous as being entrepreneurial in India. I think some of the biggest business houses in India are like, Marwadi and Gujarati families. So we, not only in the family, but as a society as well, the kind of culture you sort of grow up in is everyone are probably doing something of their own. You hardly have anyone who'd sort of work for anyone else. So even if that business was very small, he might be running a mom and pop store, but he'd be doing something on his own. So that sort of DNA comes very early and has been very strongly inbuilt. What also does is, it puts position of privilege because it's easier when you live in that ecosystem to start businesses as well, because you have entire ecosystems of people ready to support you, give you not only advice, but a lot of other resources to help you set up something that you want to do. So, yeah, I mean, in a way, it's been in my DNA for a long time.
Right. That's incredible. I think you just mentioned, very important factor. People think, especially these days, that entrepreneurship is associated, let's say, for example, with technology or building a startup out of technology or something like that. Really, entrepreneurship is the guy on your local corner that's opening up a mom and pop shop selling groceries. That's also an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurship, whole entire vast more, it's an incredible thing. Anybody doing anything. So you have the guy that's driving for Uber, and you have the guy that's selling on Amazon, and then you have the guy starting, the next Facebook. So that's all entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. So I think we'll cover this more as we talk, during the next hour or so. But one of the big things about, one of the big differences between India and between sort of the startup space in India and the startup space in the US and in the developed countries. In India, it's much more of a creation game, right? So in the US, if you realize how Uber started, for example, it started as a substitute for something that already existed, right? You might already have a car, but you want something that to drive when you don't, you're either out drinking or you don't want to drive. So it's a question of substituting something you already have. And in most cases, it's a question of creating something for people who don't really have those facilities, right? So most of the people who use today Uber in India are guys who never had a car before, not had the privilege to even sit in a car regularly before, right? Wow. So today now they have the opportunity to take their families out in an air-conditioned vehicle and at a price point that is feasible for them. It is the same across sectors. If you look at fintech, for example, in the US, fintech has mostly been about sort of either substituting or sort of helping the existing financial sort of institutions. In India, a lot of the people, at least 75 or 70% of the population, until a few years back, was not even in the the organized financial sector. They did not have a bank account. So I think what we've done is almost bypassed that segment of the economy and had people come in and sort of create something new for a class of people that did not have access to that service before.
Right.
So that's really is beautiful.
Right. That's very incredibly interesting. And especially as going forward, because of what you just mentioned, and because people have never experienced that before, and from my understanding, and I know there's 1.3 billion people in India, and only 500 million people are using the internet. So we know the next 800 million people that are going to use the internet is all going to be through mobile. So all the innovation that's coming through India and being created now, so let's say the taxis, e-commerce, healthcare, banking, the innovation that's coming out is going to be phenomenal because these people have never had the opportunity to experience it before. And because it's through mobile, it's a whole entire different ballgame. But
absolutely,
we'll continue that soon, and we'll get back into it shortly. So being the black sheep in the family, and being that rebel, what made you decide to go your own path, to forge your own path, and not go into the family business?
So, like I said, I think a lot of decisions that we take very early in life are, while contrarian, you also tend to sort of follow the herd. So MBA is something that, a lot of us in India think of as being the first step. A lot of people who don't decide what to do decide to do an MBA. It becomes a key to opening more gates for you. If you ask me very honestly, I go and talk to a lot of kids on campuses, and they ask me, how did you plan your career? And the honest answer is I didn't, because if you look at where I've worked, right? So I passed out in 2008, and the last few companies where I've worked, Zomato, Ola, Uber, they did not exist in 2008. So it's very, very hard to plan for a future where the future is so transient, right? I mean, the pace of business is so different. And I think even the generation has changed, right? I mean, generations, at least in India, the generations before us, you used to sort of enter a job for life. So people used to spend 30, 40 years working at the same company. I think that is totally changed because, what people want from their life has all you can do is someone's career, right? You plan where you want to sort of build up your own experience, and then hopefully those will be good enough to take you places.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So,
Especially, I'm not sure when you were born. So I don't know what generation you're in, if you're a millennial, not a millennial. Uh, and
so I am 35, turned 35 last week. So yeah, I mean,
congratulations. Happy
I'm
birthday.
thank you so much. So yeah, I mean, it's I find myself in between in a lot of ways, because I've also seen the sort of the generation of my dad and his peers who've spent lifetimes working at the same companies, and I've seen generations like my younger brother who's 10 years younger, and he's 25, and for him the world is very different. His world view is very different. So if you look at, for example, there's a great, I don't know where I saw this slide, but there's a great presentation which, if you looked at like 15 years back and you looked at the top 10 companies in the US, 6 of them were oil and gas companies. And there was exactly one tech company, which was Microsoft.
Right.
Today, if you look at the top 10 companies, 6 of them are IT companies, whereas there's only one oil and gas company in the top 10. And
Right.
the world has changed so much, right? And the pace of change is also so much faster than it used to be.
Yeah, 100%. And combined with that, if you look at this top, let's say the companies that are out there. So, for example, let's say, it's probably Facebook. I'm assuming it's Amazon. It's probably Uber. It's probably Airbnb and all those things. Because we see the success in that, and obviously in a short time span, we have this instant gratification notion that we have to create it now. We have to create it tomorrow. And that's, part of generation, the millennial generation and part of the younger generation, that it has to be now. They don't have the ability to look, 5, 10, 15, 25 years. I mean, that's what entrepreneurship is, looking that far. Excuse me. But to stick with something, I saw another interesting thing I enjoy. There was an article about the new people coming to work, new generation coming to work. And they said over there that a lot of them, if they just don't like it anymore, they just don't show up. That's it. They don't show up anymore. If they don't like it, they don't come. And it's a whole different notion of what the younger generation is experiencing in regards to work and how to work and everything.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very interesting point that you touched, because, we go to campus almost every year to try and pick up students for, whichever company I've been in the past. And we'll be going this year as well. And I've seen a sea change in the way, when you ask people, where do you see yourself 5 years or 10 years from now, which is a very, sort of basic question you ask people in interviews. It's very interesting to see how the answers have changed over a period of time, because if you ask people from my batch or sort of even before then, the answers used to be all around, in 10 years, I see myself as being in a very strategic position in a company where I can make a difference and take strategic decisions. Today, when I go to campuses and ask the same question, right, as in 3 out of 5 students are always telling me they want to start something of their own. They probably don't know what they want to start, but they want to start something on their own, which is interesting, right? And the problem is that's not even at the first stage, because the first stage is when you actually have an idea about what you want to do. But working in startups and working now in venture capital, the one thing I've realized is really an idea is not worth a lot unless you're willing to sacrifice and willing to put, get your hands dirty in making it a reality. So
Right.
I understand exactly where you're coming from.
And it's 100% like getting dirty. Ideas are a dime a dozen, but the main thing is action. Taking the idea, seeing it through to completion, actually working on it, putting it through. That's what makes the whole difference about.
Yeah.
So let's continue. So you worked at some of the top startups. You worked at Ola. You worked at Uber. You worked at Zomato. I think. Those are 3 incredible companies, and each one raised a substantial amount of money. And they're both all very big. So what are some of the takeaways? We could ask how you ended up at each one, but it would be a different discussion. What are the takeaways you found from working at some of the biggest startups in India that have not been around? Like you've said, these companies are 4, 5, 6 years old just in India, even 7 years maximum.
Yeah.
What are some of the takeaways that you learned out of working in this high startup?
Yeah, I think, working in an early stage, high growth startup is about one of the steepest learning curves, you can have as a professional. I think what I kept telling my team all the time is we probably grow more in a week or a month than most sort of companies grow in a year, right? When you're growing at 6, 7, 8% a week, it's very different. And so there's like, and that is happening without a lot of structure in place. without a lot of the resources that you take for granted, right? In a lot of the larger corporations in place. So it's almost like Bhavish, who's the CEO of Ola, used to keep telling us. It's almost like changing the engines of an aircraft while it's still in the air. So you're trying to do all of that while you also making the business work tick along, doing its normal stuff. But if you ask me specifically, there were three major areas that I would sort of say that I've learned, sort of working in startups, and those would be, trust, hustle, and timing. I think in terms of trust, what happens in startups is, unlike a lot of other companies, we don't have time to sort of ponder a lot over our decisions, and in a lot of cases, we don't have the resources to sort of review everything ourselves. So at one point of time, you have to learn to trust your either trust your team to do the job for you and to carry it through, or you have to set your sights lower, as in, okay, that's okay, I'm going to let go of this because I cannot do it. So that's really one big thing. The other is hustle. I think hustle is one of the most abused words in the startup industry, because a lot of time, the impression is hustle is simply running around like a headless chicken, showing a lot of energy but not knowing what you want to do. But I think the true hustle is, it does not start with working very hard. It actually starts with realizing what you want to work towards. So, like I said, you have very limited resources. You always stretch for time and resources. So you have to be very clear in your priorities and what are the things that are non-compromisable for you. And I think the last thing is timing. I think, like I said, in India, especially, it's a very different market to what the US or some of the more developed markets are. And then I think timing has a lot to it. Like, there's a quote by Victor Hugo which says, the strongest thing in the world is an idea whose time has come. But at the same time, there's a 2015 talk by Bill Gross which tells, one of the biggest things that goes wrong in startups that fail. And Bill Gross has invested in more than 100 startups, right? And one of the biggest things that sort of breaks is timing. So the product you introduce to the market is just not ready for it. Either you're too early or you're too late. So I think those are the three biggest things I would say, which is trust, hustle, and sort of timing. So.
Wow, those are three incredible tips right there. Three incredible tips. You have to create a blog post about that. You have to write all about it.
Maybe someday I will. I keep writing a lot. I never get around to writing a longish blog post, but I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So I do share these kind of thoughts on LinkedIn all the time.
Right. So you worked with, so that trust, hustle, and time are the three incredible things that you just went into further. Working with, from not from the venture capital perspective, but working with the startups you worked with and working with the CEO, either directly or through them, what were some of the characteristics that you saw that makes a phenomenal, a credible entrepreneur or a credible startup boss?
So, see, the thing is, you look on from the outside, and some of the things that strike you are, all of them are incredibly smart, obviously. All of them are people who achieved a lot in life. But I think the two clear characteristics that I can draw from all of the, these really big people that I've worked with, the first one is perseverance. I think, from the outside, once you're successful, it looks like, you've already made it, and these are the guys who had it easy. But I have seen the amount of effort that these guys put in. I think when I was at Ola, Bhavish was one of the sort of the first people to come into office, and I think I've never seen him offline till at least 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. So the kind of effort these guys put in is phenomenal. I think a lot of life about startups, a lot of these guys who want to start up, the first lesson they can learn from people like Bhavish is, it takes a lot of hard work and effort to get there. And the second, I think, is communication. I think what segregates, like sort of really brilliant people from people who can build really brilliant businesses and teams is communication. So you can be very brilliant, you can have the best ideas, but if you can't, sort of communicate that to your team, and you sort of build that and get the team to align to those sort of ideas and goals, it's very hard to go anywhere as a. So there's an African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So I think it's very, very hard not to sort of, have that communication skills and still build a great sort of startup or a company.
Wow. Perseverance and communication. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things you see because it takes so long to build a startup. It doesn't happen in 3 years. It doesn't happen in 5 years. And it takes a little while to build something big. And the biggest,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Sorry.
So no worries. So the biggest issue is that what happens is if they go along the journey, let's say 5, 6 years in, and they still have not reached a tremendous amount of traction, but it's growing. If they have not raised a tremendous amount of money, and they see all the press related to the other startups, everyone else, they see everything else that's going on. So it's very easy for a founder like that to get disencouraged and to start turning and start pivoting. Maybe we're not doing the wrong thing, and get bored of the original message and turn to something else and try to do so many other things because they don't have that. They're building it for so long and they have not reached that traction yet. They have not reached that tremendous amount of press and celebrity status that the other founders have. And because of that, that can give up on the original thing. So having that hustle and perseverance to stick with the original idea, stick with it through the completion and do it is just incredible.
Absolutely. So like Jack Ma says, right, his most famous quote is, so tomorrow will be really hard, but day after tomorrow will be beautiful. But most people will die on tomorrow evening. So, because you sort of give up even before you can get to the stage where you will get success. So yeah, I understand completely.
Yeah. And another thing interesting you mentioned, there's an interesting article that came out a few weeks ago about the Indian company, an Indian startup, a startup in India called Snapdeal, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
There's an article by the CEO, by Kunal
Bal.
And the article is titled, What's really going on at Snapdeal or something like that. And a fascinating article. If you haven't read it yet, I recommend you read it.
No, I would read it then. Yeah. I haven't read it yet.
And he goes into saying how something you just mentioned about is that people think, the startup life and the CEO, they're glorious. They raise a tremendous amount of money. They have everything perfect. But he was going on and saying over there that you really don't know what's happening inside of the sleepless nights, the stress, trying to pivot, trying to make sure you make payroll every single month, and so many other things. So we celebrate, we hear all these stories, but the stress that, an entrepreneur or founder goes through is a totally different ballgame than we can ever imagine unless we did it ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think not only that, but also to manage that stress and still, sort of keep your wits about you. Because see, there's always stress, right? There's this pressure from the competition, pressure from your investors. You have, once you're a successful startup, you probably have a bunch of people, but even if you're not successful, you have a whole team relying on you, right? And you still have to present a strong face to the world because you're still your biggest seller, right? As a startup founder, you're still your biggest cheerleader, seller, everything in one. So the ability to sort of persevere through and then sort of, do all of that and still sort of keep your sanity at the end of the day is something that's really tough.
Right.
And that's not something that people from the outside can see very easily.
Mm-hmm. Correct. 100%. And it's not, a lot of times it's something that not necessarily those skills something you learn. You have those skills you learn on the job also. Things that you don't know, they come out within you as you go along. So we're going to ask the $1 million question now. And I'm sure everybody wants to know, I'm sure you get this asked plenty of times. How did you get into VC? How did you become a VC?
Yeah, I do get that. You do get that a lot. So very honestly, like I told you, right, I've never gone around trying to plan my career in terms of, where I want to be. I've rather planned my career in terms of what are the kind of skills I wanted to build. And I think it's not, VC is not something that I planned for. It's what happened. But I would not say it's lucky. I would say it's just being prepared. So I think there's a difference, right? Lucky is when something just happens, by the way. Prepared is when you're ready to take something that when it comes by. And I think what I consciously try to do along the way is, try to get a bit of experience across startups. And very honestly, it was lucky that, sort of Tomorrow Capital happened because the philosophy was also very aligned to what we want, what I had done all my life for most of my professional life, which was, sort of build businesses and work on strategic stuff. So I think tomorrow we really have a very different philosophy to the other VCs, and we talk about it as we go ahead. But what they were looking for were people with skills and experience in building businesses, not people with a lot of investment sort of background, which I did not really have. And it sounded really interesting. I think having worked in sort of startups for 5 years and having worked like 52 weeks, sort of 7 days a week for the last 5 years, it was interesting. It was interesting to maybe try my hand at something new, and so I'm quite glad that I'm here on the other side of the table now.
How's the view from the other side of the table?
It's great actually because one of the best things I like about this job is you get to meet so many interesting people and see so many different new ideas every day. So I think yes, every startup is unique, and when you're working in a startup, you really love that job and you love that idea, and you sort of you're really convinced that's why you give it 100%. But you talk about one idea and you live one idea all day, all night, and all your life. And at the other side of it, you're talking to so many really smart, really interesting people, and listening to so many great ideas almost every day. And I think that's the best part about my job. I really love that, sort of meeting with such amazing people and listening to such great ideas.
Right. Wow. That must be fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Speaking to so many people, speaking to, having the opportunity to fund and to build the next startups in India.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Absolutely. And it's not even like fun, right? In a lot of cases, you may not be able to fund them for various reasons, right? Either they ask for too much or your investment mandate is for something different, but you're learning something new every day, which is not something every job can promise you. So obviously learning, but something new every day is something really amazing.
Okay. So what are some of the key takeaways you've learned so far from being a VC that you could give over to an entrepreneur? So take not from the perspective of, so obviously like you mentioned before, we have everything, the hustle, everything from perseverance, from communication, from the timing, but looking from a VC perspective now, giving, advice on to the entrepreneur or someone that wants to start a company, what would you go ahead and tell them to focus on?
Sure. So I think, so one of the things that changes a lot when you move from an operational role in a startup to VCs is the kind of the time horizon. In the startups, you live in a bubble, which is, 1 week, 1 month, or 1 quarter long. So you're always hustling towards those very short-term goals. Obviously, there's a larger goal, but most of your time goes into hustling on very short-term goals. Mm-hmm. And at a VC, you sort of flip that around, right? Because you need to have a long-term view. You need to have a long-term conviction in what you do. I think really good. I was reading a blog last week, and I think it puts it very well, which is I don't think of any other industry where you have to wait for a decade to find out whether you're good at it or not.
Yeah.
Because you only realize you're good at it if you make a good exit. So I think that's one. And the other thing that I've realized in this role is, to have a lot of belief in your own philosophy or in what you're doing, because we have a very different philosophy when it comes to the industry. And I think a lot of people have told us, what we're trying to do is probably stupid, but at the end of the day, whether you're right or wrong will only be clear maybe, like I said, 7, 8, 9 years down the line. But at the end of the day, you have to put your money where your conviction is. And as long as you are convinced about what you're doing, you won't have regrets. You might have a lot of learnings, but you won't have regrets about what you do. So,
right.
From my point of view, I think that those are the two things. But if you want to talk about, what does, what I would have for startups, and I think you captured it really well, which is, when you're in a startup, and I've seen that a lot, an idea or just, having a great team, all of that is good. But at the end of the day, you will be facing life and death situation many times for your company, right? Mm-hmm. And before it's successful, it's very, very important as a founder to sort of push through and get through that. I think that is about the perseverance. Again, I come back to it, is about the most important thing that a founder, that is my most important advice to a founder. Right. We've seen a lot of really great ideas in my position. You do that. We've let them go because we've not been sure that, whether the founder would be able to push through in case we sort of get into a sticky spot. And we've seen places where maybe the idea is not so great, but we have absolute conviction in the founder, like he's rock solid and can pull through even hard situations. So I think that's really important, and that is my one piece of advice to all sort of founders out there.
Right. Wow. And just to elaborate that a little bit more, most companies that started and have an exit or finish, it's not the same. What they exit with is not the same idea what they started with. They pivoted along the way.
Absolutely.
But incredible was the founding team. The founding team members had the ability to hustle through, to pivot it, and to stick through with it because they were incredible A players themselves. So,
Yep.
and that's what it's about. It's about the founding team, like you just mentioned. It went into incredible. So, tell us a little bit. What is Tomorrow Capital, and how differentiates itself from the other clubs and everything?
Sure. So Tomorrow Capital is a $100 million fund based out of Mumbai, and so let's just take a step back. Actually, how does the VC industry work? And we've met a lot of people. I've seen you met the co-founders of Bloom, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot of other people in the industry. How typically, VC has worked, and VC has worked since the first time. I don't know if you know the history, but VC started in the US after World War II. By a fund that was started by Harvard, I think, to help returning World War II, sort of army personnel to start something on their own, and then that's how it started and sort of has blossomed in the sort of half a century, 70 years since. And I think typically the way VC industries have worked always is sort of what insiders would call sort of diversification of portfolios. So you have a bunch of companies, and then you know that only 10% of the bets you make will succeed, but hopefully those 10% will be enough to give you a return on the entire 100% of the outlay. And that's how it's worked, right? So I mean, if you look at a typical VC fund, the biggest success in that in the portfolio will be larger than all the others combined, and the next one will be larger than all the others combined, and so on and so forth. And that's how typically VC works. What outsiders like me, or I was an outsider till some time back, used to also call it is spray and pray. So you spray around a lot and you pray that some of that sticks. Yeah. So I understand, and I'm no one who has enough experience to sort of critique that in any way. I'm sure people have been doing it for the right reasons, and enough scientific minds have been put to it. But our conviction was, if you start from the assumption of a 90% failure, it soon becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What we've seen in a lot of VC plays is, you go in as a financial investor, and you don't really add any value to building the company. So, which is where we are different. We are a $100 million fund, but we don't intend to make more than 10 to 12 investments out of this. So our typical sort of Bloom, for example, has made more than 30, 40 investments out of its first $60 million funds. Right. Typically, we wouldn't want to make 10 to 12 investments, although our first check size is still pretty small, which is $1 to $3 million. And why that is so is we are happy to go in, get our hands dirty, and build that business along with the co-founders. So a person like me does not add value in getting to understand what is a good investment bet to make. I think there are much more qualified people for that. Where someone like me and the rest of my rest of my teammates add value is, how to build a team grounds up, how to build a business grounds up, and that is what I experience is. So what we do is we go in, get our hands dirty, and build the business almost as co-founders. We get a lot more resources than money to the founders who we believe in. And then hopefully we can do follow-up investments and lead follow-up investments for multiple rounds in the same company. We don't really mind doing that as long as we know we have the right direction and we have conviction in the founders. Right. So that is our philosophy. We are a startup amongst funds as well. So we are only about a year old. So obviously we are learning our ropes. Maybe in a year, if you ask me, I might not have the same answers, right? I mean, life changes, you learn and you move on. But this is what conviction is going in, and we'll see how it goes.
Right. And for a first fund to raise $100 million in this, it's really phenomenal. That's incredible.
So honestly, we're a single LP fund. We've been lucky to have a patron in the form of the Loda family in Mumbai. And what I've really found is, the kind of backers that any fund can dream of. We don't have a lot of daily interaction, but we get guidance when we need it. And at the same time, we have the independence to take decisions the way we want to. So I think it's a good mix. Right. And like you yourself said, having 100 million in corpus allows us to take a lot of the bets that we want to. So right. Yes, it is phenomenal in a way.
So let me ask you this. So being that 90%, usually it's a 90% failure rate and a 10% success rate. And you went a little bit into the fact of how you can prevent, how you guys make sure you only choose a 10%. But how do you prevent the 90% from happening? Or is it even possible to prevent the 90% from happening, from making those wrong bets? Or not necessarily wrong bet, it could be just wrong timing or any other thing.
So what I mean is, when you start from an assumption that 90% will fail, all of your mechanism is geared towards 90% failing. A typical VC fund, if you're investing in 40 companies, you really don't have the time to help all of those companies grow, right? What eventually happens in a typical VC fund is either you get stuck with, your best performance or with your worst performance, and less of the companies manage on their own. All you add is capital. Now, what I've realized is, even the best founders, they might be the smartest guys, but they cannot know everything. I mean, there's a lot about business that they don't know. And most of these guys are first generation entrepreneurs. And unlike US, a lot of our founders are people who've not done anything else before this, either worked or had another successful business or whatever. So what happens is when you, like I said, when you go in with the assumption that, all you need to do is add money and you let these companies either live or die by themselves, a lot of them die, not because they lack money or not because they did not get market traction. It's also because they did not get access to good ideas, good people, good resources, the good opening of doors that, sometimes can bring you more business. And I think so obviously that 90% will not become zero. I mean, but even if you can get that down to 50%, by adding more value, like, which is not just money, by adding value in terms of opening the right doors for them, building the right team around them, helping them build the right team, adding a lot of experience, in terms of people who have a lot of industry knowledge and have been there and done that, giving them mentors, giving them, access to a lot of other ideas. I think that adds a lot of value, and I think that is what our conviction is, that when we add that value, when we do not go from the assumption of a 90% hit, but assumption of, all of them have to succeed,
right.
You push a lot harder. Like I said, in the end, it becomes a question of perseverance again, where, if you know it's a 90% failure, you probably won't care. But if you know that I have to make every one of them succeed, probably the conviction in making them succeed is a lot sort of bigger. And therefore, it changes a lot in terms of, the kind of effort you put into it.
Right. Yeah, 100%. That's incredible. And you see a lot of, I guess you could say a lot of, we're not talking about the Sequoias or the other big funds, but a lot of even celebrated funds only make a few investments per year because they have a similar to you guys. I mean,
yeah.
Wow. So let's say like this. What advice would you tell, were you holding now where you're a celebrated VC, you're working at $100 million fund, you work for all these phenomenal companies. What advice would you tell your younger self based upon what you know now?
It's a very interesting question. I think, advice to younger self probably is, I think one of the biggest things is not to be so hard on myself. Okay. I think what I didn't realize until very late is, everyone has their own path. Everyone has their own way to get where they will get. And a lot of times, you probably don't even know how you'll get there, but you'll get there. Eventually, even when things look very dark, there's light around the corner. You have to sort of work your way through it. I think one of the things that one of my best authors, which is Cal Newport, I love the way he phrases, which is basically, satisfaction does not lead to good work. Good work leads to satisfaction. So I think sometimes we sort of change that cause and effect. I think it's sometimes a lot about if you really work hard on something and you put in the effort, you start loving what you do. And I think that is something that I need to tell my younger self. The other thing is a little more personal in the sense, like, I think, yes, it's good to be really motivated, good to, sort of be very, very on your job all the time. But I think you always have to remember that work is transient in a way, but it's the family and the loved ones in your life that are the anchor. So I think I have been guilty at times of not giving them, sort of the kind of importance in my life that I have. I've always been very busy at work to the, sort of detriment of almost ignoring them at times. But now that I've spent, sort of been in the industry for a long time, sort of done a lot of different roles, I've realized that, work comes and goes. Obviously, you do your best. Obviously, you are absolutely committed. But you also have to be, sort of equally, if not more, committed to the family and sort of spend as much time with them as well, because they also need you to be there, and you also need them to be there.
Right. Wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. And especially, in India, they're very, very family oriented, extremely family oriented. And you see the difference, like in America, for example, where a lot of places, like, people like, will start a family later. I first want to focus on my career. My career, it's all about my career. But, eventually they could just mention it comes and goes, and your career could fizzle out. But family will always be there for you. And, continuing on and having, a better half and having kids is the most amazing thing possible.
Absolutely. So I think, and the thing is, everybody knows this, right? You always have time for something as long as it's on your priority list. It's not as much about having more time as being very clear about what your focus is. What I realize is, as long as I'm focused, I can sort of manage both. Obviously, there are times when I have to maybe sacrifice one for the other, and those times come and go. But and for most of the time, it's very easy to be really clear about your focus. You cannot do everything in one life. You need to make sure that you do what are the more important things.
Correct. And it's interesting. We can't do everything in one life. So it's about choosing better. I'm not sure if I phrase it properly, but it's about choosing something better for what you're doing now. So whatever you're doing now, eliminate it for the choice that can be better, because every choice has to be better than the previous choice you made or what you're doing. Something around that. So, sure. So who are some of the people that have made a difference in your life?
So I think like you yourself mentioned at the start of a conversation, which is every person you meet you learn something of, and that is something I really believe in. But if you to ask me, so I think I would select three people, right? The first would be my mother. I think from very early on, she was always my cheerleader. So I think like taking a different path is easier when you have somebody backing you so much. So, if it wasn't for her support, I would probably get pressurized into joining my family business and be working with them right now. But I have taken a different path, and a lot of it is down to her. The second, I think, most important person in my life was, I think, my third boss. My first boss when I was at a company called Indus Towers, and I think it was very early days for me, and I had not seen the corporate life as much. I'd been through a rough couple of jobs before then, because this was 2008, and I started in an investment bank, and it was the worst time to be an investment bank. And then sort of had to change jobs, lost a couple of jobs, and and that sort of left a scar on me, right? And then I was again going through a rough time in this job as well, in terms of the kind of expectations that they had, and what I was delivering at that point in time, or what I thought I was delivering at that point in time, until he carefully took me aside one day and told me, trust me, you need to have more faith in yourself, because you're one of the best resources I have, and if you see the people around you, a lot of them do not match up to you, but they are in 20 years into their career doing pretty well for themselves. There's no reason why you should not be able to do the same. So a lot of these things you probably know for yourself, but if someone just verbalizes it to you and someone gives you that confidence, it makes a lot of difference.
Right.
So, and I think the third is my wife. I think so. We met when we were in college, and so it's been almost 15 years that we've been seeing each other. So, and then I think, like I said, a lot of times I have been guilty of not prioritizing family life and sort of not being there when she needed me. I mean, we've been through some pretty dark times as a family. So pretty early on, we lost our daughter when she was really young. And instead of being there for the family, I actually threw myself back into work, as a way of sort of recovering from that. And I realize now that was absolutely the wrong thing to do, because she needed me as much as sort of I needed her at that point in time. And then it's something that really haunts me today. But the thing is, even if I was not there, she was always there for me. So I think it's something that I'm really grateful for. And I think in a lot of cases, if she was not there to sort of give me that advice to sort of calm me down when I'm really overworked or overthinking too much, life would be a lot harder. Yeah. So I mean, so if those are three people that are really important to me. So.
Wow.
But then, like I said, there's so many others you meet. Sometimes even a small conversation can leave a lot of impression on you. So.
Okay.
I've been lucky to have a lot of really sort of smart, intelligent people giving me a lot of good advice.
Wow. That is so candid, so honest. And it really, it touched me. It's absolutely, wow, incredible. That's incredible. I'm at a shock of words right now. So let's make it a little bit, your favorite brand of whiskey. Okay, I know you like whiskey.
So I love single malts. So my favorite is Balvenie 12. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I lost you for a bit. Yeah, so my favorite is a Balvenie 12 years. I really love that. I think it's not too smoky and really smooth. So it's something that I really love. Oban is another one that I love. So
okay.
I try and have a large collection of whiskeys, but I also luckily have a large collection of friends. So always end up sort of drinking all of that away. But that's good. It's all good.
That's phenomenal. What's the point of enjoying a bottle by yourself? You have the point of having the bottles is to enjoy it together with your friends. That's it.
Absolutely, my friend.
So, what are some of the books that have made a difference in your life that you recommend to other people to read?
So, I think very early on in my career, a couple of books that really helped me a lot. It sort of sorted me out in terms of the way I am professionally. Like I told you, I'm never late. And then live my life almost by the calendar. So I think there's a couple of books by an author named Cal Newport. One is called Deep Work. The other is called So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Okay.
And I think those are a couple of books that left a really good impression. Deep Work is basically about, we all live in a very distracted times, I think, especially with smartphone, with our laptops, with the way we work nowadays. It's very distracting. And then sometimes it's very hard to do the kind of work that requires you to be very deep, right? And I think that's a book that taught me how to sort of, sometimes if you don't go deep, you don't add value. So everything, if you can be very superficial and on the surface all the time, if you're always on the phone and sort of always meeting people or always communicating on social media, it's very important to take a step back and sort of set yourself up to do deep work. And I think that book really taught me that. The other is So Good They Can't Ignore You. In essence, the book has one simple message, right? And then that message is basically that if you work hard enough on something, this is science that you will start enjoying it. So it's not the other way around, where and that is why a lot of people give up, because I'm just not enjoying this. But that's not how it works. I mean, how it works, and I think it's a fallacy, because I think it's you read these quotes all the time where do something you love and you never have to do something. It's not like that. It's like do something really well and you'll fall in love with it. So I mean, it's a great book that taught me sort of that very early on, because like I said, even I was at times prone to giving up on things. But that's a book that really helps you get your motivation in the right place. So, and I think another book that I think again is an evergreen classic is a book called, I am sure you would have read it, called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I think there's a reason why a business book is still relevant a century after it was written. Yeah. Sort of a lot of books you read today probably will not be relevant even 10 years later. So, but there's a reason that book has been relevant for 100 years, because it talks not about business, but how to generally treat people around you. And I think that's something all of us could learn in a world where we have short-term, sort of very short attention spans. It's a book that will really tell you how to respect people more and how to, sort of in turn get a lot more respect. So that's another one. And I think I read a lot. I still make it. So my New Year resolution this year was to read a book a week.
Okay.
But I ended up finishing it in 10 months. So I'm sort of ahead of schedule. So I read a lot, and I think I read a lot of fiction as well. So science fiction is something that I read a lot of. If you were to ask me if it's non-fiction book, it'd probably be Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
It's a phenomenal book. I think sort of it's just such a crazy sort of fictional book where created an entire world. And then I've recently read a couple of some really good autobiographies. So I think Shoe Dog is an amazing book. Let My People Go Surfing is an amazing book. So I read a lot, and I think all of that. What I also do, by the way, is keep notes of all the books that I read, or most of the books that I read. So in fact, we are on Zoom, so I can actually show it to you. So let me just show it to you. Give me a minute. So yeah, here you go. So if you can see this, these are sort of the books that I've read, and I have like notes on almost all of them. So there's the McKinsey Way, Start with Why, Angel Investing, The Subtle Art of Not Giving Up, which is another really good book I read recently. Originals, Bad and Good. There's a ton of books that I read, and I sort of, the idea is to sort of retain some of the learning. So I end up reading a lot, and I end up sort of spending a lot of time with books. So
you have to start publishing those notes on those books. You you have to release your work to the public.
Yeah, so the idea is I don't mind that. The problem is, the kind of notes I keep are very intrinsic to me. I'm not sure. So I would probably have to go around and do a lot of work in order to make them in a way where people understand it as well. But yeah, I mean, what you say is true, which is, if I have this, I should share it with more people. I do share it with a lot of my colleagues. If I read a good book, I share my notes with my colleagues. Maybe I could also put it on a blog.
Right. You have to understand that making an impact in the world is not about affecting 1,000 or 100 people. It's about affecting one person. So even if you put your work out there and 100 people won't understand, but one person in Indonesia will understand your notes and will affect his life, it's worth it for everything. That's how.
Absolutely.
Wow. I have so many more questions, but I know you're very pressed for time. And, we could go on for another few hours because I know there's a lot of stuff we didn't touch upon that I want to still touch upon, like, your framework for setting goals. I know you're very goal-oriented and you're very strong about that, and many other things, but I'm sure we'll have a second segment soon, so I'm not worried about that. But,
great, sure, Ephraim. It was great talking to you. And like I said, like you yourself mentioned, happy to, jump on chat again at some time.
But Piyush, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being honest. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And thank you for being humble. Tell your mother I said thank you for creating you the way you are. It's amazing,
Thank you so much, Ephraim. And like yourself mentioned, it's all about impacting one person at a time. And I think what you do, sharing people's stories, does that so beautifully. I think there's a great story which, there's this boy walking along on the beach. And he's like, when the tide is going back, he's throwing one starfish at a time into the sea. And this old man comes along and says, there are thousands of starfish on this beach. You'll never make a difference if you throw one at a time. And the boy just picks up one, throws him back into the sea and says, it made a difference to him.
Wow.
So I think, it's all about making impact one at a time. That's how great businesses, great stories, and great connections are built. So thanks a lot for doing that, Ephraim, and it was great talking to you.
Right. And if there's anything I can do for you or for Tomorrow Capital or for the entrepreneurs that you work with, always here for you guys. Never hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.